Imagine waking up and realizing that humanity has simply disappeared. There was no nuclear war, no massive explosion, no warning. One day the planet was full of people, full of noise, movement, voices, traffic, lights, and life. And the next day, you are the only human left. The cities are still there. Cars remain parked along the streets or abandoned in the middle of intersections. Houses are still full of objects, photographs, clothes, furniture, and memories of lives that suddenly stopped. But there is no one anywhere. No voices echoing through buildings. No footsteps in the distance. No lights turning on in any window. Just silence, stretching across the entire world in a way that feels unnatural. Almost impossible to accept at first. At the beginning, you probably would not understand what is happening. Your mind would search for explanations. Maybe you would think there had been a massive power outage or some kind of evacuation. Maybe you would assume people were hiding somewhere, locked inside buildings, waiting for something to pass. You might walk through empty streets calling for someone, expecting a reply. But as the hours pass, the silence will begin to feel different. Not temporary, not accidental. The entire world would feel empty in a way that slowly becomes impossible to ignore. The first day would feel strange. The second day would feel unsettling. And after a week, one terrifying truth will become impossible to deny. You are completely alone. The first practical concern would probably be simple and immediate. Food. Fortunately, in the beginning, this would not be a problem. Supermarkets would still be filled with products. Houses would still have pantries stocked with food. Vending machines would still be full. You could walk into any store and take whatever you wanted without hesitation. There would be no lines, no cash registers, no employees, no customers. For the first time in your life, the entire supply system of the modern world would exist without anyone there to use it. But this strange abundance would not last forever. Over time, fresh food would begin to rot. Fruits and vegetables would spoil. Refrigerated products would become useless once electricity stopped flowing consistently. Freezers would slowly warm. Ice would melt. Cities today depend on incredibly complex systems that require constant maintenance. Power plants, water treatment facilities, fuel distribution networks, communication satellites, transportation systems. Without people to operate them, those systems would begin to fail one by one. The lights would go out first. Electricity grids would collapse in sections. Then water systems would stop delivering clean drinking water. Without maintenance, pipes would burst, pumps would stop working, and entire urban infrastructures would begin to decay. Soon, elevators would stop moving. Street lights would turn dark forever. Traffic signals would freeze in their last color. Buildings would begin to deteriorate slowly, quietly, as weather, time, and gravity continue their work without interruption. And little by little, something remarkable would begin to happen. Nature would start returning. Within just a few months, plants would begin pushing through cracks in the asphalt. Grass would spread across abandoned parking lots. Weeds would climb over sidewalks. Small trees would begin to grow along streets that once carried thousands of cars every day. Animals would also begin reclaiming spaces once dominated by humans. Domestic dogs and cats, suddenly left alone, would either starve, adapt, or form wild packs. Rats would multiply rapidly in empty cities. Birds would nest in places once too busy for them to approach. Without the constant noise of traffic, many animals would move closer to urban areas. Deer might walk calmly through wide avenues. Coyotes and wolves could slowly begin exploring suburbs. Rivers would run cleaner. Without industrial pollution, the balance between nature and civilization would start shifting in ways no human society has seen in centuries. And you would still be there, watching it all unfold. Surviving alone on the planet would not only be about finding food or shelter. It would also become a battle against something far more powerful than hunger or cold: loneliness. Humans are a deeply social species. For hundreds of thousands of years, we evolved living in groups, communicating constantly, sharing knowledge, emotions, and experiences. Conversation, cooperation, and companionship are deeply wired into the human mind. Removing every other person from the world would create a silence that no environment was ever meant to hold. At first, you might start talking to yourself more often. Perhaps you would turn on radios, televisions, or old recordings just to hear human voices, even if they are only echoes from the past. You might revisit familiar places from your life, schools, neighborhoods, parks, just to feel some connection to the world that used to exist. But as months turn into years, the silence would grow heavier. Without new conversations, new stories, or new relationships, time itself might begin to feel different. Days could blur together. Seasons might pass almost unnoticed. You would become the last living witness of human civilization. Libraries filled with books would still exist, holding the accumulated knowledge of centuries. Museums would still protect art, fossils, and artifacts from ancient cultures. Entire cities would remain standing for a long time, filled with technology, architecture, and creativity that once defined humanity. But all of these things would have lost something essential: the people who gave them meaning. Culture, language, art, science, all of them exist because humans share them with one another. Eventually, a new question will begin to grow in your mind. If you are the last human, what is the purpose of anything now? Perhaps curiosity would push you to explore the world. You might travel through empty countries, visit places that once required passports and planes and long planning. You could walk through massive airports that now sit silent. You could drive across continents without seeing another car. You might cross oceans, climb mountains, wander to the ruins of giant metropolises that once held millions of people. But no matter how far you travel, the reality would remain the same. Only one human consciousness would exist on Earth. Yours. The planet itself, however, would continue moving forward without pause. Years would pass. Decades would follow. Without maintenance, buildings would eventually begin collapsing. Steel structures would rust. Concrete would crack. Bridges would slowly weaken and fall. Satellites orbiting Earth would eventually lose stability and burn up in the atmosphere. Slowly, the planet will begin transforming into something closer to the Earth that existed before human civilization. Forests would expand over abandoned land. Rivers would flow freely again. Wildlife populations might grow in places where they once disappeared. Entire cities could eventually become ruins covered in vegetation. Nature does not hurry, but it never stops. Given enough time, even the greatest structures humanity ever built would fade back into the landscape. And maybe thousands or even millions of years in the future, someone or something might discover the remnants of what once existed here. Strange concrete skeletons rising from the ground, rusted fragments of machines, mysterious objects buried beneath layers of soil and plants. Whoever finds them might try to understand who built such things and why. They might study the ruins the same way we study ancient civilizations today. But perhaps they would never fully know the answer. Because the last person who could explain the story of humanity, the struggles, the achievements, the dreams, the mistakes, the entire history of a species that once dominated the planet, would have been you. The final voice of humanity in a silent world. The last human on Earth.